Today's video is about a module that looks deceivingly simple, but will open up a ton of sonic exploration possibilities within your rack. For each of its two channels, you can select which one of the two inputs you want to output. And because there's a variety of switching algorithms and modifications, this can lead to sub-octaves, new wave shapes, a wider stereo image, unusual new patterns from static input, and much more. Let's check out the previews and then we get right into it. In a nutshell, the SW3 is a stereo analog selector. Each channel can take two audio or CV inputs via the A and B inputs and output one of them. You can manually switch between both inputs by toggling the switch at the top. Putting the top toggle into the middle sets it to auto mode, which will select one of three algorithms that controls the switching. When the H mode is selected, the voltage at the D input will decide which signal to let through. Here I'm just toggling the switch from off screen. The splice can also switch between your inputs automatically. The automatic switch can happen whenever both signals have the same level, that's the X algorithm, or when both signals have the same level and go into the same direction at the same time. That's the equal sign algorithm. Additionally, you can select for the splice to switch whenever it detects a crossing, or every second or fourth crossing. Because the module has two identical selection circuits, you can operate both of them individually, or have A1 and B1 be normaled to A2 and B2 for separate processing. You can also use this splice in so-called swap mode. That means whenever the input of A1 is sent out of out1, B1 is sent out of out2 and vice versa. But more on all these stereo functions later. The easiest way to show you how the splice works is to use it as a sub-octave maker. If we have any periodic input into A1 and nothing in B1, we can use the splice to switch between our waveform and silence at every zero crossing. Adding silence this way means that the waveform takes twice as long to repeat, therefore it will sound at half the frequency, or an octave lower. Using the splice we can expand on this even more by using the divide by 2 switch, and then it takes 4 times as long for the waveform to repeat. In other words, it's 2 octaves lower than the original signal. Now let me mix in some of the original signal. Because the splice works instantaneously, there is no phase delay between the processed signal and the original signal, which means I can easily bring in the original signal without the fear of any phasing or other phase distortion type issues. Additionally, if we, instead of using the output of out1, use the output of on1, we get a very typical square wave shape at either the same frequency or 1 or 2 octaves lower, relative to the input signal, which is great for adding square wave sub-octaves to oscillators that don't have that function built in. Of course, we can expand on this setup by adding another signal into B1. For example, if you have an oscillator with separate outputs, we can basically mix and match two different outputs together into one using the splice. The result will be a signal that is again 1 octave lower, but because you can mix and match all kinds of different basic wave shapes, the splice can help you out to find new kind of timbres in your existing oscillators. And of course, modulating the wave inputs will lead to modulated wave outputs, often in non-linear fashions, depending on where the zero crossings end up in the modulated signals. What I particularly enjoyed in this regard is sending a basic wave shape into a wave folder and then recombining the original and the wavefolded signal using the splice to give me some quite gnarly new wave shapes. Using slope switching when combining two audio waves can actually lead to fairly noticeable pattern switches, as having zero crossings with similar slopes can take a few cycles until it lines up, as you can hear here. Using the D and R inputs can further help to shape the sound. In this case here, we're truncating the sine wave of A1 with the silence in B2 to give us a couple of new timbres. Finally, if we send a square wave into D1 and a sine wave or other periodic signal into A1, but have them slightly detuned, we can get a somewhat aggressive and jittered square wave out of the on-1 output. Have a listen. But of course we don't have to switch between two audio inputs at audio rate, but we can actually use the splice to switch from one audio input to another for phrasing reasons. In this patch here, I can switch between a sine wave and a saw wave that is outputted by my Godspeed using the D1 input. I've routed the volt per octave output of my sequencer into the Godspeed, but also into the splice. And so once my notes reach a certain threshold and are high enough, the splice will also switch to let the second signal through. Notes below the threshold, switch the splice back to audio signal 1. And of course it's possible to have it, say, switch randomly every 16th note as well, so you get a bit more movement. We can also use the splice to stereorize our mono signals. In order to do this, we will send our mono signal into the splice, use the 1 to 2 function to copy it over to the second channel, and then set it up that at every zero crossing it will alternate between sending the mono signal out of out 1 and out 2, essentially giving us an extremely wide stereo image for this mono signal. Let me switch from mono to stereo one more time so you can hear the difference. In a musical context, I can use this to widen my lead synthesizer without introducing any phasing issues. Here's the signal in mono. Now I'm bringing in a bit of the stereorize effect. The effect will be more pronounced if you're using headphones. This type of stereo imaging works best on like straightforward waveforms, but you can also use it, for example, on mono effects. Here I have a mono oscillator and a mono spring reverb, and of course I can just pan them in the stereo field like this. But I can also use the splice on the reverb to give the mono reverb a bit of a wider spread. Because the reverb is a bit more noisy and has more zero crossings, we will see that the switch between the left and the right channel is not as predictable, which can manifest in some high frequency overtones that you can hear here. But you can also filter them out using a filter. Or you can add more distortion and overtones by switching to the hard switch mode to incorporate more hard edges into your waveform. You can use the splice for some more glitchy type effects. For example, if you have a stereo original signal, as you can hear here, and then you combine it with the same signal that has, say, a reverb, delay, or flanger applied, you can use the splice to quickly change between these two signals to introduce a whole bunch of different artifacts. You were just listening to the original signal, and now you hear the secondary signal. And here's it with the splice doing its thing. Using the D inputs is another way to get some more aggressive overtones into the patch. Or you can use the splice to get some bit reduction type effects, as we will see in the next example. Which normally works quite well on drums. But the splice does not only work on audio signals, you can also use it to modify CV signals. This is a patch straight from the manual, where we have a clock input into D1 and a sine wave into A1. And the splice is set to trigger on crossover. What this will do is give us a jittered output of the clock input, because whenever the clock input is high on D1, the splice will wait for the signal of A1 to be at a zero crossing before it will introduce a switch, and therefore the signal on 1 will be slightly delayed compared to D1. The higher the sine wave frequency in A1, the less the jitter, and vice versa. But you can also use this splice to mix all kinds of different CV patterns. Say you put in two static gate sequencers, two static LFOs, or any other type of fairly repeatable sequences, the splice will switch in between them, combining the two different inputs in an interesting way. You can see it in the coming examples, and if you look at the top left of the module, you can see which pattern is active. And of course you can use it to combine different LFOs to create completely new patterns. So if we have a very fast LFO pattern, as we can hear here, and a very slow LFO pattern like this, then both of them are pretty much basic by themselves, but we can combine them to get us something like this. And messing with the LFO shape will also change the patterns as the zero crossings shift. And of course you can have both input signals spread out over stereo. And finally, we can use the two outputs of the splice to trigger different volume automations for percussive elements. Here, I'm using two static patterns, mix them up with the splice, and send them to my open and closed hi-hats. Let's check it out. So yeah, that's the splice in a nutshell. As you can see by the length of this video, even though this is only 6 HP, there's a ton of functions in this splice, made possible by the clever design. I particularly liked the splice for splicing together different waveforms to create new types of waveforms, like getting even more out of my oscillators. I also liked combining different types of static LFO patterns or trigger patterns to give me something new and unexpected. And I really like that I can have different modifiers and algorithms that change up the result in different ways. As you've heard, if you use the splice on complex audio signals, you might introduce artifacts, or you could use the R1 input to introduce a whole lot of wave-based distortion yourself. And you've heard it can really destroy any type of audio signal and add a kind of unusual distortion. I think the sweet spot here is a bit more narrow than for the other use cases, but it's definitely worth experimenting. Overall, I think in 6 HP and for a very reasonable price, there is a ton of functions that this module is doing, and it really enables everything else in your rack and makes you think about new and creative ways of combining your audio or CV inputs. So that's all on this splice for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.